Hello and welcome to the ScatterVolt channel. Today, I'd like for you guys to meet Spark, the $600 gaming PC for budget enthusiasts. To be more specific, Spark is meant for gamers who want to get into PC gaming on a solid platform, but be limitless with the hardware and upgrades they can get on their computer. To put it simple, I want this PC to be fun every time you turn it on, and allow you to mess around with it, kinda like your first car. One of the biggest inspirations for making Spark was my first gaming PC, because it was very similar in concept. With that computer, I purposely chose a more untraditional part style, and because of that, my first gaming PC is still my main computer to this day, and I still abuse it on a daily basis. Anyways, I gotta give credit where credit is due, which is to Cooler Master for helping sponsor this video. They reached out wanting to help me for an upcoming budget gaming PC I would be making on the channel, and for that, yet again, I have to give a huge thank you to Cooler Master for helping deck out Spark with some really cool parts. And I also want to give thanks to the other sponsor of today's video, my wallet. But now, back to the build. So now you're wondering, okay ScatterVolt, so you hyped up the build, we all know it can go to 5 GHz, so now what are the parts? To begin, I'll start with the motherboard, which is an ASRock Z73M Pro 4 Micro ATX motherboard. For the RAM, I have a single 8GB 2400MHz DDR4 stick of Corsair LPX RAM, and for the hard drive, I went with a standard 1TB Western Digital Blue hard drive. Next up, for the graphics card, I have the 2GB MSI GeForce GTX 1050 2GT overclockable graphics card. Closing out for the Cooler Master parts in this build, for the case, I have the Cooler Master Lite 3.1 Micro ATX tower. For the power supply, I have the Cooler Master MWE 450W 80+ bronze power supply, and for the CPU cooler, I have the brand new Cooler Master Hyper 212 Turbo LED CPU cooler. And finally, as the crown jewel of Spark, for the CPU, I've chosen the glorious Intel Core i3-8350K quad-core overclockable processor. All this adds up to a total price of $634, which is currently inaccurate, as you'll soon find out later in this video. So rather than replicating this build part for part, I've linked down below a very similar build with the same parts but from different manufacturers to keep the price of this current PC as low as possible. Now, wait a minute, ScatterVolt. I can easily batch up a much faster gaming PC for $600. Now, hear me out for a second, because there is a history behind this computer, because Spark was originally going to be a $400 AMD budget gaming PC released back in September, but due to some obvious hardware problems that I ignored for a good 2 months that caused me to rebuild, replace, and retry this build a good 5 times, out of frustration, I switched Spark to the Intel platform. But yet again, this didn't actually solve the problem, as the problem all along was one faulty stick of RAM. Anyways, this explains why the current cost of this computer is so high, since it was originally built back in September when RAM and graphics card prices were considerably lower than what they are right now. And then also explains why there is a budget GTX 1050, 1TB hard drive in a budget gaming case, and a $600 gaming PC, since those parts were originally meant for a $400 gaming PC. Despite that though, Spark is still one hell of a system when it comes to gaming, all thanks to that Overclock i3 processor. Which leads me to my next point. Upon switching to an Intel-based system, why did I choose to go with an i3 8350K? The main reason why is because you can unlock full coffee-like overclocking power for only a mere $180 at launch, which got me interested. That and its initial gaming benchmarks that I saw on techpowerup.com being overclocked just to 4.5 GHz scored higher than some of its much more expensive i7 and i5 brothers from the Coffee Lake and KB Lake lineup for over $100 less in price. As well as the only motherboards out for Coffee Lake at the time of making this video are Z370 series boards, so I didn't really see any point in getting a locked Coffee Lake processor if in the first place it's already going to have an overclockable motherboard with it. All this led to me believing that this could be a fantastic first gaming processor for any new PC gamer wanting to invest in a fast gaming processor that will last a long time and allow them to tinker around with it, but will completely shatter their bank account. Kind of like my first gaming PC I built back in 2012, which had a similar overclockable quad-core processor, that being the 2500K that I purchased for $185. Adding on to the theme of this build, the Z370M Pro 4 offers a lot of features for its price that'll appeal a lot to enthusiasts. Those being RAM overclock speeds of up to 4300 MHz, 2 Intel Optane Ready M.2 SSD slots if you're crazy, a USB Type-C slot, and ASRock's rock-solid VRM for all of your overclocking desires, all for a budget price. Enough talking about the parts, let's start talking about the performance you can expect out of Spark, especially with its overclockable i3 processor. In real-world tests, I noticed that Spark can reach a stable 5.0 GHz while playing games, in this case in Warframe, at around 35 degrees Celsius across all 4 cores thanks to that Cooler Master Hyper 212 Turbo. This also includes the overclockable GTX 1050 in this build as well, reaching a stable 1579 MHz core clock and 7059 MHz memory clock, while keeping temperatures pretty low since this is an MSI GTX 1050 with the dual fan version. Now you may be wondering about the voltages I got when using the 8350K at 5.0 GHz, which during my testing of Wolfenstein 2 were at most 1.225 volts. And yeah, this is all on a 450 watt power supply. Pretty nuts, right? But anyways, if you're going to be doing a lot of computing or rendering on Spark, I would recommend lowering its clock speed to 4.8 or below to increase the lifespan of the 8350K if you're going to be performing more intensive tasks on it versus just doing regular gaming. What about the sound output on a 5 GHz system? For that, here's a sound test while running StarCraft in the middle of a match. It's not terribly loud, but it's certainly audible due to the extra fans in the system that were provided. Now here is Spark again, but with no overclock at 4.0 GHz. And lastly, if you were curious, out of the 5 days I've had Spark, I've only encountered 2 blue screens, which might sound like a lot compared to a regular system, but hear me out. Those only 2 blue screens happened when I tried to run Fortnite, because I guess Fortnite can't handle the greatness known as 5 GHz. Now onto what you've all been waiting for. The gaming benchmarks. Does Spark's overclocked GTX 1050, 8GB of RAM, and godlike i3 5.0 GHz processor make it amazing for gaming? For that, I tested 9 popular PC titles, all ranging in graphical difficulty, to see if that crazy i3 makes a difference. I overclocked the i3 and the GTX 1050, but I left the RAM the same since I didn't have time to find a high enough stable RAM clock speed with the time that I had. Anyways, let the benchmarks begin. not bad, not bad. Like I can say, you can configure a faster gaming PC than this for $600, but that 5 gigahertz though, come on. I expected a lot better of Spark in Rainbow Six Siege. I don't know why, but its average in game was 54 frames per second, and Rainbow Six Siege is a very well optimized game in general. I'm still not surprised with PUBG and Fortnite, since those two games are technically still in their early access stages, which means they aren't, officially fully developed games, but whenever those full versions do come out, like say for PUBG coming out with its official release in December of this year, I expect the frame rates on each of those games to go up when being played on Spark. In all seriousness, I really think that 5 GHz made a difference, as here are some additional benchmarks that I took on StarCraft, Civilization 6, and Wolfenstein 2 on the i3 at its stock 4.0 clock speed and its fully overclocked 5.0 clock speed. On Civilization and StarCraft, you can see that the 5.0 GHz boost noticeably benefited the performance of each of those games, but that's likely since they're both CPU intensive games. And even for non-CPU intensive games, in this case Wolfenstein 2, the overclocked i3 showed a minimal increase in performance versus 5.0 GHz compared to 4.0 GHz. In other notes, I believe that the GTX 1050 in this build is being carried heavily by that i3 processor, and the majority of games that I tested, since those averages for 1080p gaming, were pretty high for a 1050 in my opinion. But let's be real, this is a budget enthusiast system. Its purpose isn't meant to be a hardcore gaming PC, it's meant to be a fun system you can tinker around with, overclock to incredible heights, and expand to hold the latest and greatest hardware technologies. Anyways, that is the build video, and as always, be sure to like, favorite, subscribe, and all that, and it's the ScatterVolt channel, signing out.